All right, welcome back to another episode of Dentman Powerhouse, where we dive into the minds of individuals shaping the future of dentistry. Today, we have Dr. Jeffrey Buske. Is it Buske? Did I say that?
Buske.
Buske. Dr. Jeffrey Buske, the founder of the Limitless Dentist. Jeffrey's journey has been one of transformation, shifting from burnout to self-destruction to peak performance and true fulfillment. He's on a mission to help dentists break free from stress and the overwhelm and the burnout to have it all, quote unquote, the mastering their mind, their body, their balance, and their business. Getting and all that. I hope I said all that, Doctor.
That was perfect, my man. That was perfect.
Excellent.
I love it.
So
right on.
Let's dive. Beautiful. I love it. Let's dive right in. Dr. Jeffrey, if you want to give a little intro about yourself, your journey, and then we can jump into Masood always has questions. Dr.
Sure.
Milad has tons of questions. I usually just get one or two out, but go ahead. Let's start from there.
Well, let me actually jump all the way back because, gosh, man, guys, I've been practicing dentistry now 28 years, if you can believe that. You probably tell a little of the gray hair, on the side rails there. But well earned. And here's the thing, man. When I first got out of school and everything, I joined a practice. It was a good practice, but it was a smaller practice. And I just threw myself into tons of continuing education because I had this thought pattern and process, and probably a lot of the younger docs today too, like, oh, I just got to take more and more CE. The more CE I take, the more successful that I'll be. And patients are just going to magically fucking show up and be there because I've taken this CE, right? And so I have this accolade behind my name. That's just not the way it works. Like today, you've got to be a marketer. You've got to be an educator. You've got to be an advertiser. You got to understand so much that it's different than just showing up and say, oh, I took this CE course or I took this continuum. And yes, you have to have skill sets that allow you to perform dentistry at a high elite level. I believe that. And I poured so much time into that. And I was flying all over the place, taking all kinds of continuing education. And at the end of the day, man, the practice that I was in, like I was literally seeing about 6-7 new patients a month. And I had to, I felt like I just hit home runs just to be able to eat. Like, can I pay my car payment this month? Can I pay for my apartment this month? All that. And that's back when I was single. I didn't have like a whole lot of, things like I didn't have a family. I didn't have kids that I was responsible for. That was like easy street, right? Now that I look back at it. But I had gotten to such a point that I was like, man, this is crazy. This is not how I pictured dentistry to be. I was like so frustrated. I was like literally ready. I was ready to walk away from dentistry. And then I remember, it was back in the day, I remember being like on Dental Town. And all of a sudden I came across one of Bruce Baird's posts and he was writing about productivity. I didn't know him from anybody. You guys will like this story because I was looking at what he was writing. I was like, how is that even possible, man? It was so far out of what I even thought anybody was capable of. So I private messaged him and I said, man, I know you don't know me, but I said, there's no fucking way you're doing what you're doing. It could be legal. And he could have told me, go jump in the lake, whatever. And he was kind enough to write me back and go, no, man, we do this month after month after month because we have systems. I was like, what? And he's like, yeah. He asked where I practice. He's like, no way. He goes, I'm going to be over there this next weekend at a sleep seminar. He goes, why don't we get together and have a cocktail? I was like, all right. So literally went there and we had an amazing conversation. And I remember writing down on a cocktail napkin, 3 things: systems, processes, and people. He's like, you need those 3 things to be very successful. Practice. And I was like, yeah. And so we talked for a while and then we were going to consider maybe doing some work together in a practice. And then all of a sudden he's like, man, he goes, I don't know. He said, I don't know if you want to look at this or consider this, but I have an opportunity that he had an associate have to move. And he's like, I don't know if you want to come down and consider practicing with me. Now, his practice was 72 miles away from the door that I was living in, right? And I was like, man. And I'd actually gone to, he invited me as a guest to come to Productive Dentist Academy. And it was just like, man, this is the way that I know I'm built to practice. He gave me the invitation. I was like, yes. I said, but if I come, I don't want to just be an associate. I said, my target is to be a partner. So then we started to practice together. And then I bought half the practice. And then we practiced together for 17 years. It was fantastic. And I mean, he's still such a great friend, mentor, amazing clinician, incredible communicator. I learned a ton from him. And in that time frame, I also decided well, I'm going to open up another shop too, just a scratch practice. So I opened it up like 52 miles away, halfway between where we were and Dallas. And that was the most stupid thing I could have done because I gave myself a second job. And here I am working 4 days a week in my main practice here at Granbury. And I'm going over working 1 day a week on Fridays so I can do some bigger cases and play in doctor daycare. And just like, here's the truth of it. I did not have the capacity to do what I was doing at that time. As really, truly as a leader, I could lead and I definitely could produce. But just because you can lead in one practice and produce well doesn't mean that you have the acumen to go over and the capacity to go over and start to grow things at such an exponential level like that. And man, like I said, I didn't have the capacity to do that. So I was stressed out like crazy. I was feeling overwhelmed. And you guys probably know this and maybe have felt this. And for the listeners too, like, listen, we're never taught, trained, or educated on how to deal with stress or feeling like we're going to burn out or feeling this feeling of overwhelm. And so many of us choose to sedate. Like my choice was with alcohol. So I would come home every single night and just drink and like, just be like, man, I know for a while I can numb out. And so I would do that and I would get my wife drinking and then we'd start to have explosive arguments. And, you know, pretty soon I was disconnected from my wife, disconnected from my kids. I had no connection with God. My body was going to shit because at that time when you're drinking, you know, yourself to sleep, you don't really have this big desire to get up and work out or train in the morning. So, you know, you just wake up and feel like shit and go in the next day and you're just trying to survive. I was like, what is happening, man? This is not the dream of dentistry that I thought it was going to be, right? Are you guys with me so far? I know I'm just like, you put a couple quarters in, watch me go, right? So like,
no, Doc, no, I'm just fascinated by the fact that I'm going through the same thing right now.
Well, I mean, so there's a lot of people that can relate. And here's the thing, like, I remember like one Friday night, right? My wife and I don't even know how many bottles of wine we had to drink, but it was enough where we were just like completely just in a fight, saying everything that's on our mind. And she's like, Jeff, she said, I didn't sign up for this shit. The kids and I walk around here every fucking day on eggshells. And all we want to do is love you. And you come home and just blow up on us. And I was like, shit, like I didn't even have a response. Because it was the truth. Now, am I proud of that? No, not at all. Not one bit. But it was enough of like a wake-up call and a slap, you know, in the face to be like, listen, you better wake up because this bus is about to leave. So I had to figure some shit out pretty quick. And it was kind of crazy because it's crazy how God works. Like next week, like this crazy ad came across Facebook and I wasn't even usually on like social media. This is back in 2016 now. I got this crazy ad that came across from a maniac named Garrett J. White, and he ran something called Wake Up Warrior. I started watching it one night, and my wife could hear what was being said. She was cooking dinner. She goes, "Who is that?" I go, "I don't know, but this guy's got my number." It's like he's telling the exact story. It's like he's living in my head. She's like, "Yeah." She goes, "I kind of see that, you know." And she's like, "Let's watch it." So there was like a 45-minute documentary that we watched. We got done with it and she's like, "You're going to go do that, aren't you?" And I was like, "I think I need to." She's like, "I think you need to too." And so off I went. I'd signed up for something that I didn't really know everything that was going to be entailed. The best way that I could describe it was if you took Navy SEALs Hell Week, you took Tony Robbins and you took Fight Club and you put all that together, that's what that week was like. I mean, it was brutal. We were out in the Pacific Ocean till 4 something in the morning. We're carrying logs. We're doing PT. We fought each other. I mean, just crazy shit. And then a whole bunch of emotional shit that I didn't plan on. But at that point, like I needed to be broken as a man, broken down that significantly so that I could actually rebuild. And that's what had to happen. So, you know, I'm sitting there face down at 3:15 in the morning on I don't even know what disclosed location on some beach, crawling in the sand. And I've got some maniac yelling, you know, "You don't know where you are. Your kids don't know where you are, you know, and then why are you here?" You know, but I needed that. And that's exactly what I needed. Now, I don't think that is necessary today. I mean, for some people, maybe, but the tools and everything there and the frameworks that I learned and that I'm certified in teaching and everything are so relevant that we don't physically have to beat your ass down like Navy SEALs Hell Week in order to get those same type of results. Does that make sense? So me being like, you know, if you picture like out of 1 out of 10, I'm sitting at 1 when I felt like I was at 1 when somebody tells you, "Hey, do this," and you're going to get to like 5 or 6. You're like, hell yeah, I'm doing this. So like I took back and I was implementing, man. I was implementing when my coaches were telling me, my mentors were sharing with me. So I just put it into play and I was like, holy shit, my life is dramatically transforming before my eyes. Like I started to operate in a way that I started to create just a first and foremost, I started to operate with a checklist. And then it started to become a habit. And then it started to become more than a routine. And then it became a ritual. And now it's just part of my physiology of who I am. It's not like I don't look at it as something I do. It's just who I am. And so what I realized was a huge, big part of me was just like, I was leaking power every single day, like showing up saying, well, shit, I hope today my Starbucks and my lucky underwear and my new tennis shoes are going to get me through the day. And I'm going to have a bunch of people saying yes to my care. Fuck that. That's bullshit. Like, let's actually go into a day filled with power. Like you've already won the day going into the day. That's a much better way because now you can show up and you can actually lead authentically from a place of power and you have certainty in where you're going. And now you can have a team that's enrolled in your vision. You create a culture that matters. And now you have patients that want to have their care done. Totally different energy, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
I gotta
drink. I gotta take a drink for a second.
Yeah, go for it. I got a question. I read on your profile, you mentioned, prisoner to producer. Can you break that down for us and what mindset shifts are kind of key to dentists that are stuck in the grind?
Yeah, no, that's such a great question, man. Like, I think the practice can be beautiful and it can also be a prison, right? Because if we're not there, if we don't set it up appropriately, we're not producing, we're not earning. It's just sucking everything out of you as an expense, right? And so the way that we've got to start to shift our thinking is more, instead of just like, I'm going to just show up and I'm only going to bang out some dentistry and grind and grind and grind and work myself to death like 5-6 days a week. We've got to start to shift our thinking and saying, okay, what's actually possible? It's like Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile. Like once all of a sudden you knew it was possible, then you're like, shit, there's some different ways we can do this. What? That's actually possible. So, and it doesn't mean that you have to be doing all, like I do a lot of big treatment now. Like I love All on X. I've been doing it for a long time. I mean, but it doesn't, you don't have to do that in order to do what I'm doing. Like I could literally build a practice on doing incisal edges, buccal pits, and night guards and be so freaking profitable. I'd never even have to probably numb anybody. If you know how to schedule things appropriately, and you know how to run your team, and you know how to talk and communicate with your patients, now you can set things up to be very productive. And a huge big part of that is something that I call reverse engineered production. So the way that most goal setting, quote unquote, goes is like we just pick some random ass target and we pull it out of our butt and be like, all right, next month, I'm doing this. And by the end of the year, I'm going to be doing this. That's no different than the guy at 7-Eleven who's just sitting at the cash register saying, all right, I'm going to have $1 million in the bank by the end of this year. Now, unless he pulls the lottery card, then maybe, right? But the fact is, when we get grounded in the facts of where we're at today, and we can actually tell ourselves the truth, when we can tell ourselves the truth of where we're at, whether we like it or not, when we get grounded in that reality, now when we go and set our targets or our goals, I like targets better. Targets are more precise. Goals are kind of generalized. But when we set our targets, now we're grounding them in truth and we're grounding them in facts and reality. Whereas before, if we don't take the time to do that, everything then is built in fiction and fantasy over here. You're just bullshitting yourself. Why do that? That's like the people that stand up, I'm going to produce $2 million next year, and everybody claps for them. So happy, happy clappy. That's just, no way. Let's be real. Like, let's get real and authentic about where are you at currently inside of your practice? What's your overhead at? What do you have for marketing expenses? What are all these categories costing you? And what are you really producing? What are you collecting? And once you're grounded in those things, now you can actually start to look at it from a business perspective and see what makes sense. Once you set targets now that are based and grounded in reality, now it's easy to reverse engineer that back in and saying, okay, here's my first milestone that I want to hit. So maybe in the next 90 days, I want to be here, but let's actually back that up even more and say, all right, where do I want to be by this next month? So let's bite on this elephant or cut up this elephant and eat it one bite at a time, but let's do it that way. Does that make sense? So when you can start there, that's a huge part of it. I think there's two very big things inside of dentistry, besides what Bruce said, people, processes, systems, right? That's a huge component to being very, very successful. And inside of that, we also have to have very high skill sets. Like I talked about, your CE, the things that you take, the things that you do, you have to be able to pull off very well, because you need people to give you accolades. You need people that want to refer people to you. The way that you show up, the way that you communicate, your bedside manner, the way that you take care of people, the way that you take care of your team, how you operate in every essence of that is imperative. Now, that's one component. The second component is mindset, which very few dentists pay a lot of attention to. That's the other whole half of the business equation, guys. That's the whole other half. Like, we take all this time to learn CE on particular techniques and look at adding technology. You want to hear a crazy statistic? This is a crazy statistic. This is not braggadocious, but I went back and I looked at my numbers from when I went through and started to look at changing my mindset. I looked at from 2016 to 2021 inside of my practice. At that time, I didn't add any new procedures and no new technology. So all of it was mindset and the way that I showed up and led. Let me ask you, what do you think happened to my production in that time frame? Just take a guess. Like, what kind of number do you think transformed inside of my production game from 2016 to 2021, just from mindset and the way that I chose to show up and lead inside of our practice? Just take a guess.
Like 40%.
2x.
Give me a number. If I was doing $1.2 million in production, personal production by that time, what do you think the number would be?
1.7.
Okay, keep going. I had it over 7 figures by just that. That's what I want. I'm not saying that in a braggadocious way. I'm saying it in a way for you guys to understand how powerful mindset and leadership is. It's one of the most undervalued things that we don't see, because we don't correlate it with it. People ask well, what time do you go to work? I'm like, going to the practice, or what time do I start working on me in the morning? Because I'm crazy, man. I got to get up. I got to work on me to get myself dialed in so that I can go show up, produce, lead, like I said, and have clarity and certainty in the way in which I operate.
Specifically work with male dentists. Why do you think men in this industry struggle with these types of challenges? And how does your approach kind of help them reclaim their power?
That's a great question. And just for the record too, I think plenty of women struggle too. I just don't think that I'm authentically designed and shaped to train and coach women, because I can't authentically stand in their shoes and understand all the different stresses that they have. I'm never going to have a patient come up. Typically, it could be, but I'm not usually going to have a patient come up and think that I'm the hygienist and I'm actually the doctor. And a lot of women have to deal with that. The patients aren't usually hitting on me, unless I wear my extra lucky shoes that day. I'm just kidding. But women have a lot different. They've got some of the same stresses, but they also have different stresses that I cannot authentically take on and really lead them in. Does that make sense? But as a man, listen, as a man, you take and here's what I call, you tie in the trifecta of insanity. We run a practice, so we own a business. We have a wife. We add in a spouse. Now you add in kids. Holy shit, look out. That's a lot of shit to try to manage. That's a lot of shit just to manage your practice and not go insane. Now you add in those other two components, that's a lot. And sometimes you feel like you're just an ATM machine. I got money going here. I mean, what am I doing this dentistry for? The IRS? And then, so you start to feel all these things and you feel the pressure. You feel the pressure to go and produce. And as I said before, we've never been given or trained on any skills on how to take and utilize that stress, or take that stress in and flip it or reframe it is a better way to put it. Once you take and learn that tool on how to reframe things, it'll set you free, because every single one of us runs stories in our lives. If you look at how you operate every day, every single day, your actions that you take, the actions that you don't take, all those are run by the stories that you tell yourself. Those stories that you tell yourself over time, the more those stories are told, then they become beliefs. Now you add in the laws that you grew up with and the rules that you grew up with, that you operated by your parents, your siblings, your friends, your teachers, your coaches, all these people that had influence in your life. And guess what? That helps run your stories too. So we all have a way in which we have this worldview, the perception, the way in which we see the world. And, like you meet that one guy or whatever, and you're like, dude, you're my brother from another mother. Like you talk to him for 5 minutes. You're like, I like this guy. I like this guy. It's just because your worldviews are similar. But then you meet somebody else and you're like, dude, this guy's a joke. Who is this clown? Like, get this guy out of here. I can't visit with him. And it's just because your worldviews are opposing or different. Doesn't mean either one's right or wrong. It just is. But inside of dentistry, we have a lot of stresses, but we've never been taught how to deal with that. And then we come home and we don't want to admit to like our wife, like, holy shit, maybe I'm scared about like, I've got some fear maybe going on about next month. How am I going to make payroll? Or I'm thinking this, or is this the right hire? Or is this the right time to hire this? Or gosh, what's happening in the economy? We have all this shit that's happening. And you're trying to manage all that like Mr. Cool, like, hey, I can't let it on that I'm really kind of terrified maybe inside because I don't want my wife thinking that I'm weak, but that's the reality. And so what do? We push all this shit down further. Or, at least most of the time in my age group, I'm 53, like I was taught not to have a whole lot of emotion as a kid. Like if you're emotion and you cried, you're a pussy. Like, that's just the way it was. Like, quit crying. What are you doing? Go rub some dirt on it. Get back in the game, kid. I mean, and I hate to be that blunt, but that's just kind of the way it was. But the reality is that, listen, as human beings, as men, we're designed, we can take anger, but that anger is meant to be expressed. We take anger and we push it down and down and down, then it becomes rage. We're not meant to deal with rage. When rage comes out, unfortunately, it typically comes out with the people that we love and care about the most. That's why I would come home and I'd blow up on my wife. That's why I'd blow up on my kids, and we've never been taught to have that ability to take and transform those feelings or even feel okay that you have those feelings. Look, I think in order to be able to love deeply and passionately, you've also have to have the whole other capacity to be able to go to anger and rage and those. You have to have that great capacity. Otherwise, you just sit in this middle space of vanilla and you're just like a robot. You just pretend like everything's all right. If you're a pretender, you're bullshit. The reality is we all have things that upset us. We all have things that make us angry, things that piss us off. But many times we don't have anybody that we talk to about it. As guys, we're really pretty shitty in communication with our boys about like, yeah, man, I think, maybe a little bit better now. Like, oh man, I've got this going on or this going on. But to really be vulnerable, really be vulnerable with your boys, unless they're like really, really good friends from forever, it's hard to be that way with other guys. So part of what I look at is let's create a space where we can do that. And everybody knows like me, I'm happy to throw myself under the bus first because why? Because I know it opens up the space. And if you guys can look and say, well, if that guy can do it, I definitely have hope for me because I'm light years ahead of where that guy was at that time. So that's kind of the way that I start to look at things, but we have to have some tools in order to be able to do that or some frameworks to be able to run with. Once we can understand that, life becomes a lot easier, becomes a lot more manageable because look, at the end of the day, we're all going to have chaos that comes our way every single day. We're going to have some fires that we have to put out. You're going to get to the office and you might have 2 employees that are at each other's throats, or you're going to have somebody that comes back going, golly, did you see what's being said about your ad about implants? They're talking about being able to go to Mexico and have this done here. You're a ripoff artist. All these people talking crap about this. So you're getting hit with all these different things before you've even seen the patient. Oh, and then you look at the schedule and you're like, oh, there's some of my favorite patients on today. I can't wait to see them because, your blood pressure goes up just seeing the name, so you can have all these things. And like I said, if you are standing in a place of power at like you come in at a level 2 and now all of a sudden the problems and the adversity that you're facing is at a level 4, you're out of luck. It's going to be really tough to manage that day. It's going to feel very stressful and overwhelming. You come in though at a 7, you're like, I got this. All right, let's handle this. You do this. You start directing and leading in a very different way. Why? Because you become unshakable. The way you show up and lead is very different then. Much easier to show up because you have clarity and certainty. And when you cast a vision for the practice that's bigger than you, now you can enroll a team in a vision that's bigger than you. And now you're all rowing the boat in the same direction. Now you create a culture that matters. I love, one of my favorite compliments is when people come in and they're like, I knew you guys would be more expensive. I knew it. And The reason that I chose to come here and have my work done is because you guys make me feel like family. You guys truly, authentically care. That's not just me. That's my team. That's my team that does that too. I mean, they're every bit in charge of that as me. I can have one impact, but it's my team and the experience that they create that has that. That's why those patients say it. They don't say it just because of me at all. But when you have a team that believes in you and believes in the vision and is excited about what we're doing for people, it doesn't matter if you're doing implants, ortho, cosmetic dentistry, or buccal pits. Like I said, you're taking great care of people. That's what it's about. At the end of the day, there's nothing in this world that works without relationship. Period. Otherwise, AI would be taking over the whole world, and maybe someday it will. I don't know. But the reality is, at the end of the day, I don't care what you have for AI. You got ChatGPT and everything else under the sun. But at the end of the day, look, we got to communicate with one another and people. People want to know that they're going to be heard when they come into your practice, listened to, that you want to know where they're at and where they want to go. And it's not tough to create a plan along that way that satisfies that. If you break it down very simply. What are you guys hearing?
That's such a amazing thing. I was telling Masood and Hossein, and I don't know if you know about me, but I graduated dental school 2 years ago, and everything that you were telling, and as you were talking, I was just going back and I was saying, man, I leave this one. I like you said, the unfortunate part of our, this is one of the reasons why I started doing this podcast, was because I saw that in our industry, there is such a lack of, especially when you leave dental school and you're comfortable in that zone, and then you leave, you come into the real world and you're like, what happened? Like, now you're out, you're on your own. There's nobody. You're trying to figure everything out. You're trying to manage people. You're trying to lead. You're trying to do all these things. And then there's a number of nights that I just drove home and I'm like, what am I doing with myself? Like, is this really what I signed myself up for? Just like you said, I was like driving from Iowa. I was in Iowa, my first job. And I was like, it was dark. It was raining. And I'm like, what is going on? What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I was stressed out. I'm like, there's no more faculty to be like, hey doc, what am I supposed to do? And that's truly like what was one of my motivation behind everything that I've done so far, is because I just see such a big gap in our industry. And I think we can empower ourselves and the dentists if we come together and help each other to really understand that the ways to manage those stress, like you mentioned. And that's why I appreciate the stuff that you post online so much, is because of that, because I think you're addressing your issue, and through your stories is so relatable to I'm living it and I understand it so much because your story is so relatable to me. And I think, I was having a conversation with Masood. I was like, dude, like my staff come complain, oh doc, someone drink my Sprite. I'm like, dude, who cares? Like, I'll buy you $3 in Sprite. Don't worry about that. Like, this is not a big deal. Like, I got more important. Like, these are the type of thing that we as dentists deal with, that I'm like, dude, I'm like, let's not talk about that. But doc, like, with that being said, like, I just want to know, like, why do you think that there is such a bit, like, I'm sure that this school know this. I'm sure that like ADA knows this. I'm sure everybody in our industry knows this. Why do you think this is one of those topics that is not being talked about enough? Or why is it not, why are we not getting educated on this before we get released into the world after dental school?
Well, here's the thing too, man. I think that luckily, we are talking a little bit more nowadays about mental health, which is beautiful. I love that. And I love what you guys are doing. You guys are getting on. You guys are talking. You're spreading your word. And I think that's fantastic. You are documenting your journey, right? And that's a big part of it, because then other people can see themselves in you. And that's a huge component. I think, one of the things that's hard about dental school is you're like, all right, we got this much time to get things done and get them proficient and get them ready to actually be in the world. But man, I almost think that if you had a big part that was geared, even if it took another 6 months or a year, that's geared towards having the ability to learn about business and mental health, I mean, I think it would totally transform our industry 100%. Because right now, like I said, you're getting out there and you're like, I'm worried about how do I prep my teeth appropriately when I first get out of school. And I'm sitting there thinking, how in the heck do I market myself? Like nowadays you almost have to create your own brand, right? Like I got to be a brand. And You're like, I'm just trying to survive and pay my bills and make sure that I don't hurt anybody when you first get out of school. Like, I mean, those are like real thoughts. And as opposed to like, I'm going to be this huge, great, amazing cosmetic dentist, like you have aspirations, yes. But reality check is like, okay, now I'm learning under fire. And to your point, dentistry can be a very lonely place. Like I found myself a lot going, why am I the only guy who seems like I can't figure this out? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, why can't I run a couple practices? Why can't I run a couple practices and have a happy wife and great kids and make the money that I want to make and have happy patients? Like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I figure out this equation? Because when I look on Facebook and Instagram, like everybody looks like they're living their best life. And I'm like, well, then I play the comparison game. I'm like, well, I should be having that. Like, why am I not having that? And then that's a very dangerous game to play, you know? So, you know, I think with what I'm doing now, you know, like I love the fact that I get to work 3 days a week and I make more than I've ever made before and seeing the type of patients that I want to see. Do I think that's possible for somebody coming right out of school? No, not necessarily. But I think you can sure shortcut your journey where it doesn't have to take you 28 years to do that. Matter of fact, one of my coaching clients now, like he's a year and a half out and he's already producing like $1,000 an hour and just doing well and just enjoying life. And it's not just about production numbers, but just that's a way in which we can start to measure some things. But like I said, if you get your systems down, you start to learn how to schedule appropriately, you learn how to communicate. And then the biggest things too, like how to manage the stress. That's a big part of it, man. Like every day I dial myself in before I go. You know, part of it is meditation. Part of it is the way that I journal through things. I mean, and part of it is reframing. You know, if I've had a really tough, hard, shitty day, I still have them. I mean, there's still very stressful days in the practice. I'm not going to blow smoke and tell you it doesn't happen. It happens. But on my way home, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to pull over in the nice golf course parking lot where I'm just looking out over a beautiful area. I might sit for 5 minutes and just breathe for a minute, just take a minute just to reconnect with, hey, before I walk in my door with my wife and kids, like people in my life that are the most important, let's just let myself decompress for a minute. That 5 minutes is worth the next 3 or 4 hours that I'm going to be spending with my family. You know, that 5 minutes it's priceless, really. But many of us don't think that way because we've never been taught to think that way. We've been taught to go, 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 go. Hey, I'm late. Let me grab a bite to eat on the way. Now I'm eating crappy food, putting crappy food in my body, not taking care of my body, you know, and I'm stressed or I'll stress eat. We all have our own vices. You know, mine, like I said, was alcohol for a long time. It could be food. It could be alcohol. It could be weed. It could be porn. It could be, or a combination of all of them. Shopping, whatever. At the end of the day, people buy things or do things because we want to feel better. Or we want to feel just a release of some of that tension that's put on us.
It's a very Tony Robbins quote. That's what he talks about, that we all do things because we want to generally feel better about everything. That's the motivation for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And it's a very simple, straightforward thing, but a lot of people generally forget that. But I like that. Cool.
Well, we've always been taught, you know, like you're going to either move towards, you know, or move away from pain or move towards pleasure. But when you look at, I want to feel better, that takes both of those things into equation, right? And so that's just like you said, it's a very simple, easy equation to consider that, you know, and there's nobody, like if you're not in the greatest place right now, the minute that you tell yourself the truth of where you're at, there's no better person on the planet to fix it than you, because you've created you are right where you're supposed to be right now. Every single one of us in life is right where we're supposed to be, because where we are is the accumulation of our actions or inactions that we've taken, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and again, getting back to the stories and the beliefs that then drive all those things. So I'm a big, firm believer in when we can start to change our stories, you can totally change and transform your life. And that is one of the biggest frameworks that I teach men inside of dentistry is, let's teach you how to reframe things. Let's teach you how to take the stress and reframe that. Let's teach you how to take things that are going great, like that you have gratitude for, and let's put the gas on that. So you don't have things derailing you. Now you're going into the day with intention. Now you're going into the day being divinely driven. Now you're going into the day not by default, but by direction.
Dr. Buske, I got tons of questions. Can I just open a little out on the side? I was just going to ask you, how did you learn to talk so well? Because I talk to a lot of dentists, not all of them know how to talk, and I can tell you that.
Okay.
Where did you learn how to talk like this? You talk very presidential and like, remind me of this other guy we had on the podcast, Edgar Jones, like an NFL coach.
Well, I'll tell you,
Do you agree with that?
I appreciate it. No, that's a very great compliment. I appreciate it. For me, honestly, I think it's because I just tap into my heart, and I'm not trying to just be heady or trying to sound witty. I'm just sharing vulnerably from where I'm at. And I think that's one of the ways that I think when you share authentically and you're just you're not trying to be somebody else. And so when you do that, you can tap into a very unique aspect, and you have a better opportunity to communicate in a way that connects better. It was fun. There's a guy named Elijah Desmond. He ran something, I think he sold it, but it was called Dentistry's Got Talent, where it brought together a bunch of people, speakers and all that. And he saw something I was doing. He goes, "Oh, you need to come compete." I had not heard of it before. This is a number of years ago. I go, "All right, well, let me go do it." So at that time, I'm like, well, I've spoken at a few events and different things, and and I thought, well, I'm going to be speaking in front of a lot of people. Maybe I should hire a speaking coach. So I did for a minute, and I was like, all right, I've got some of my story down. Week before I was going to go compete, first thing the speaker coach asked, she's like, "Well, what do you want to get out of this?" I'm like, "Well, it's a competition. I want to win. What do you think I want to get out of it? It's a competition. If I'm going to compete, I'm going to win. I've always been an athlete. I play to win." She's like, "Okay, fair enough." So we get it up. I got my speech down. Week before, I called my speech coach, and she's like, "So what's new?" I'm like, "Well, I took my whole speech and threw it in the trash." She's like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Why?" I'm like, "Didn't feel right." She's like, "Okay, well, what are you going to speak on?" I said, "I'm going to speak on me, my story, and tell it." Now, we had kind of like TED Talk, 10 minutes. Like you couldn't go over time, no slides, no nothing. And you just, it's easier to speak a day or half a day, but it's when you got to condense things down and hit people hard in like 10 minutes, you got to blast, you got to be entertaining, you got to have a story, you got to be relevant. And that's one of the best things that kind of taught me. I was like, oh shit, this is tougher. I shit canned my whole speech right before, and I'm like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. So I kind of basically rewrote it on the plane out to there, and I was like, all right, I'm going to run through this a couple times. And then literally I was just like, here we go. And I just told my story and felt it from the heart. And then went on to the second round. They're like, you better have, a second speech ready that's like 5 minutes. And I was like, all right, I've got like 2 maybe ideas. And so I just, again, shared that. And then I ended up winning the whole thing. So it was super fun. But it was great. But it was one of those things, I guess, to answer your question, that experience allowed me to realize that you don't have to talk for hours and hours and hours to have impact. Where you want to come from is look at trying to meet people where they're at. And at the same time, have a little fun, be entertaining, take people also on a journey a little bit, And for me, it was like letting them in to see some of my darkness. But at the end of the day, too, like, for example, like we talked about some dark shit tonight, right? But here's the other thing, like, here's the different possibility. Like right now, where I was at, like on the verge of divorce, living my worst life in the pit of my life, to now fast forward. Now we moved into our dream home. I work 3 days a week. Our kids are thriving, doing amazing. I've got a better connection with God than I've ever had. And for 53 years old, I'm in pretty damn good shape. I take great care of my body. I don't just work out. I train my body. I care about what I'm doing. I care about my sleep. I care about my relationships. I'm a good steward of my relationships, because one of the things is as you get to different seasons in your life, your priorities shift and change too. I love it because you guys are younger guys. And I love the fact that if there's anything that I said that just alters maybe the way that you see the world, or that you hear it, or that you think, holy shit, that could change your trajectory for the rest of your career. And I love the fact that you guys are like, oh, this is great. Let me hear it. Let me hear some more. Just because if I can impact your world just a little bit to where it didn't have to be like so difficult, or where the struggle wasn't as long, or the strain wasn't as difficult or tough, where you can learn from my mistakes. Now that allows you to then expedite things, compress the time. And then now you're going to pass that along to the generations behind you, because there's always going to be people to your right that are ahead of you that you're going to learn from, and that are doing what you want to do, or operating the way that you want to operate. And find those people, seek them out, and pay them well, because they're going to collapse time for you significantly. And then there's always going to be people to your left that are behind you that you can support, facilitate. Like, that's why, like, when I'm driving down the highway here in Texas, like, I'll jump on the tollway. Why? Because I want to get to where I want to get to faster. I don't want to be sitting in traffic stuck. I'd rather pay to get to where I want to be faster, to learn. Same thing. I will never not have a coach in my world or a mentor. I will always have somebody. Why? Because they're going to see blind spots that you're not going to see. They're going to be able to look at your life and look at where you're at, where you want to go, and then look at, all right, have you considered this? Have you thought about this? They're going to see things that you just don't see yet because they're operating at a different level. That's why that's so important. Great question.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think so many of the things that you just said, we had already heard it from this other guy, Edgar Jones. Like, he was an NFL player. He's coaching right now. Especially one of them he was talking about cutting someone's time in half. That when you teach him something, and then something that would have taken him maybe, I don't know, a year to do it. Now with this new thing that you taught him, it's going to take him 6 months. So
yeah, I look at like guys that I work with now, like shit that would take them 3 to 5 years to accomplish, we're accomplishing in 1 year. Why? Because they're hyper-focused, and now we create a pathway to do that, and you create a map to make it there. When you do that, now you're able to shortcut that in a huge way. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
And you think about, like, when you're able to accelerate that for somebody that impacts their practice, that impacts their productivity in their practice, that impacts the profitability, we're talking about a monumental amount of profitability over that individual's lifetime, plus the fact of it, having an opportunity to have a better relationship with your wife and kids, have a healthier body, come to have whatever spiritual connection you have. Like, I'm a believer, for me, that's God, but whatever it is for somebody else, I do have a deep belief that you have to have some type of spiritual belief in something bigger than yourself, whatever that is for you. I could care less, but I do feel like that. Like, we have to have something that we believe in that's bigger than us, that pulls us forward.
And Dr. Buske, something that you mentioned that really validated the idea that I had. I think there are 2 different types of changes in life that anyone goes through. Some of them are gradual changes that for something good to happen to you, you just need to stack it up, like financial freedom, like relationships, like networks. They don't come to you overnight. You just have to keep building upon it until it gets better. And some of them are quick changes, just like the shifts in your mindset that you mentioned, like your mindset in leadership, or when you learned how to really talk, you just said, I'm just going to be straight out, just say whatever comes into my mind. And so many other things. One of those things that recently happened to me that you just mentioned was this idea of systems and processes and people. And I had a very brief question about that. Before you learned this, what did you lose to not knowing this? And what did you gain after you learned this? This is something literally I learned like just 2 days back, that I needed to have this since at least 4 to 5 years back.
Yeah. No, I think I have lost team members because of this, which is huge, costly. I have lost tons of dentistry just because of not operating in that, that section. I had embezzlement happen with me. So there's all kinds of different things because sometimes systems or processes weren't set up, and maybe I didn't have the right people in the right chairs, or right seats on the bus. Not to mention the fact that the way that I was showing up as a leader was very weak. So when you throw all those things into it, it's hard to put a dollars and cents cost on it. I would tell you probably multiple 7 figures over the years for sure. When you look at what I'm capable of in that capacity, but at the same time, guess what? It's in the learning of those things that now, I wouldn't change it going back. Maybe I would have shortcut the time frame, but I wouldn't change the experience because that's made me into who I am today, if that makes sense. And I believe that we're all on part of our own journey to figure some of that out. But to answer your question, those things are imperative because those things dramatically impact your culture and your culture that you create inside of your practice. That is one of the biggest accelerators that's undervalued, and to create a culture where you have more happiness inside of that space is big. Like, we've got, 23 team members inside of our practice. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of personalities to manage, including my own. So when you tie that in and multiple doctors, there's a lot of egos, there's a lot of personalities. So we've got to have, that's why I'm saying capacity is such a big deal. We've got to have such a capacity and container to be able to house that in order to lead that. And so when I talked about earlier, like leaking power to me is just another word for capacity. When you think of it, you can think of power in very different connotations. Some could be positive, negative, however we look at the definition of it. But if I think of it simply in the way that I teach it strategically is from the point of capacity, that's why I realized, like for me, I was just showing up in a very weak place of power every day. I was showing up, I was out of power as a leader in my practice. I was out of power as a leader with my wife and my kids. Shit, I wasn't even leading myself well. I mean, when you can't step into the game, it's very difficult to lead and run an organization when you're coming from a weaker place of power, or better yet, weaker place of capacity. But when we can come in and when we can create frameworks that allow us to create renewable power every single day, that allows us to operate with synergy and harmony across 4 domains, across our body. So our health, our fitness, our being, our spirituality, our purpose in life, our balance, our relationships that matter in our business, our practice, and our bank accounts. When we can create synergy and harmony across those 4 areas, holy shit, look out. Now you're coming in and you can create capacity at a whole different level that you never knew was possible. That's why we talk about having it all. And what I find most men struggle with is like they might have 1 or 2 of those areas operating really well at best. And then they flip-flop a lot. Like you might be killing it in business. You might be crushing it in business. Like there's guys who produce way more than me, but I'll put up against them the way that they're operating inside their marriage, the way that they're operating inside with their kids, the way that they're operating inside their spirituality. Their body looks like shit. They're fat, overweight, and halfway diabetic or pre-diabetic. Or you got the guy who's ultra fit and he's doing well. He's killing it in the gym. He's spending 2.5 hours in the gym every day. But then yet his business is struggling. So there's all kinds of different ways when we can start to look at these things. What I want to look at is how do I come in and make it possible where we can accelerate or lift all those areas simultaneously and move a man out of scarcity in those areas into abundance. Now that's a different conversation. That's a more fun conversation to have. And you're right, Masood, it doesn't happen overnight. But when you take and you put in the commitment and you take and put in the discipline, things that we do and the things that I teach are very simple. They're just not easy. That sounds like a paradox. Simple, but not easy. Why is that? It's because you have to have the capacity to stick with it. You want to hear something great? I'll tell you what a great coach said to me. He said, Jeff, fall in love with doing the boring shit. Write that down. If you're driving in the car right now, write that down. Fall in love with doing the boring shit, because half the stuff that I do in a day, I don't want to do. But you know what? I do it because I love the results that I get. So I don't want to be known for my reasons. I want to be known for my results. So I could give excuses. I could push snooze. When I push snooze, I'm saying fuck you to my dreams and to my family, basically. That's how I look at it.
Cool. The thing you just mentioned, I think it's very controversial because I myself, I'm a big believer in the journey, not the results. And I believe that anyone who focuses on the results, you are very less unlikely to get them than someone who loves the journey. Am I right or no?
Why can't you have both?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you're not doing it unless you would love the results. But I'm just saying, if you don't like the journey, your chances of success becomes extremely lower.
So if you listen to what I said earlier, like I wouldn't go back and change it because that's part of my journey to get to where I'm at. So did I love every bit of it when I was having it? No, not at all. Do I love it when my wife and I collide? No, not during the collision. But afterwards, when we get to a different place and we start to find the gift on the other side of that, the journey was worth it. And so I am a firm believer in both. And that's something too, like we're very used to having one or the other. Consider both and. Why can't I have both and? When you can start to see things that way, like I personally believe like we need to have, okay, that's such a good question. I'm going to expound upon that for a second. As a leader or as a visionary or somebody, you're always looking forward, casting that vision as you're going along your journey. But at some point too, you got to take a step back and look back at what you've accomplished. Because in other words, it'd be like If my coach put me on the treadmill and he's like, all right, Jeff, start running. I'm cruising, busting it out. I'm running. I'm sweating. I'm a couple miles in. And I'm like, man, I'm kicking ass. I'm making good time. I'm like, hey, coach, when do I get to stop? Never. What? Never. Like I never get to stop and actually look at what I accomplished. That's disheartening to me. Like, I think, and I'm just poking fun a little bit, but like, I want to make the analogy so that we can see that, like, there's a very big important part of this inside of our journey process that we've got to be able to measure. We've got to be able to look at and see, I've made these accomplishments, because we very rarely take that time to do that for ourselves. That's also where a lot of confidence comes from. When you look back and you're like, yep, did that, I did that, I did that, I hit that, I did that. If you ever done a timeline for yourself, it's very eye-opening. You start to look at all the different accomplishments and you get done with that. Now there's going to be good things on there and not great things on there, but you're going to also look back and be able to see, if you want to have confidence going into a scenario, when you can look back at some of your past successes, you think about that, that pulls that past success right into your present now. And you're going to alter the shift, your state of being, the way in which you're operating, the way in which you're occurring. Your energy is going to totally change. That's imperative. Your way of being is one of the most important things that you show up and operate with every day. We've been taught to do more so that we can have more and be significant. But when you flip it, be more, or your birth is your worth, you are already enough from the beginning. Your way of being allows you to either do more and have more, or have more and do more. It all transpires from your way of being. But we just haven't been taught that, really, or operate that way. We've been taught grind. And look what we've been taught in dental school. Like, oh, you got to be perfect down to the micron for your crowns. If it's not perfect, you're fucked. You're a loser. You didn't do it right. Okay? So we've been taught and hammered to have this game of perfection, and perfection is a dangerous game. I'd rather shoot for excellence, because I can look back at any case that I've done and always see something that I could have done a little bit better, even after doing it at a very high level. Always something where I could look at it and go, you know what? I could have probably done that just a little bit better. There's no shortage of information. There's no shortage. You take information, you put things together in information, and now it becomes knowledge, like a recipe, right? Like, you need a recipe in order to make a great meal. You can't just throw together random things. But inside of that, when we compile that information and put it inside of a recipe, or inside of, like I'm talking about, inside of frameworks, now we can make it applicable to now create something that we can be successful with, to have an outcome and get a result that we're desiring. And once we do that, now that becomes our experience. Now that becomes our wisdom. So I want you to think about this, there's nobody on the planet that's going to have your thoughts or your feelings or ever have your experiences. Ever. But when we try to be somebody else, or we're not authentic, it's going to feel like you're chasing something that's not in alignment with you. But I always think that, like, when you have your own experience and that becomes your wisdom, yeah, somebody else might have done that, but they're going to say it in a different way. You and I could all sit down and say the same, identically say the same words to a patient, but the way in which we communicate, the way in which our energy is, all of that from each one of us is going to be different. So they're going to hear the message differently. Your audience, you're going to reach different people than I'll ever reach. Why? Because they line up with you. I'm going to maybe reach different people than you're going to reach, or we're going to reach people together. Again, getting back to like worldviews and self-views and all those things. So a big part of that journey is a big part of the experience, but I think it's very important that we have a great journey. And I don't downplay the journey. The journey is one of the most fantastic parts of it. But I do believe that you've got to look at focusing on having some results along the way that you can look at and aspire to, that are going to pull me forward. Otherwise, it's just like me throwing the dart and being like, well, I hope I make it there. I like to have things that I am working towards too, because as men, we're builders. We like to build, and we like to complete things. We like to complete projects. You know who one of the most dangerous men on the planet is? Man without a vision. Why? Because that man is going to get bored and he's going to burn shit down. Why? To recreate it. We will burn down marriages. We will burn down businesses. We will burn down friendships. We will burn down our bodies, burn down all kinds of shit just so we can recreate it, because we're builders. So if you're bored or you don't have a vision, that's a dangerous place to be as a man. But when you're on target and you know your purpose in this world and you're moving towards that constantly, now you move forward with purpose. And that's a different way of getting back to your way of being, shows up in a different way. You guys see how this is very different? We're talking from a mindset standpoint as opposed to just skill sets. Like I could talk to you all kinds about skill sets with implant dentistry and crown preps, all kinds of that. That's fantastic. I love it. I could geek out like the best of them, be happy to. But at the same time, I want you to get a thorough understanding that your way of being has as much of an impact as your skill sets.
Dr. Buske, I think that we can sit on this call. As a young dentist coming out of dental school, the one thing that I appreciate so much is when I have doctors, seasoned doctor like yourself, to come on this podcast, give us your time, which is such a valuable thing. I truly, from bottom of my heart, this conversation has been so inspiring for me in my head. As you're talking, I had my flashcards like I was in the school and just taking notes because
I love it.
I truly feel so inspired because I think that everything that you touch upon is such an important thing. And I said, like you said, that mind shift in my mind. Every time I get on these things, but tonight especially, I'm just in my mind. I'm thinking about things that I can do differently for my own life, my own personal life, that I can be a better person, to be a better leader, to be a better friend, and everything in between. And I think it's such an important thing. And sometimes we lose the sight of that, And I think sometimes I like you said, grind, and I sometimes forget to just stop and just look back and enjoy that journey. I think all of those is so important. But before we close out, I just want you to just give us maybe just a quick advice to all the young dentists that are coming out of dental school or they're coming behind you like myself. What is one advice that you think can be life-changing?
Sure.
Just give us that.
I want to say two things. One, I love that one of the key words that you just said that I want to make sure everybody hears, because it's very important, is you said, I'm inspired. There's a very big difference between motivation and inspiration. Motivation is very external. So I can motivate people. I can get people fired up. We're going to have fun. We're going to be off to the races. I'm going to get my team pumped up. Woo, let's go. I can be motivating. Or I can challenge or talk to something inside of your heart that actually inspires you. So when I leave, you're inspired. That's internal. Because when the individual who came and brought the energy is gone, motivation goes with them. But when you allow that internally to change or to transform, I would say, that's inspiration and that's internal. So that's a big deal that I wanted to come back to. As far as when you're getting out of dental school, look, one of the things that I think is one of the best things I could tell you is, one, learn to not take life so seriously. That's one of the best things I can tell you. And make sure that you continue to have some fun. Schedule fun in your life. Like literally put some fun in your calendar. If you're married, put time in your calendar for your spouse. If you have kids, put time in your calendar for your kids. Make daily deposits into people in your world that matter. Be a great steward of relationships. The more you can work on relationships, I think the more successful you're going to be. Because when you can operate in a great way in relationship, that's what you start to create with your patients. And then that's going to also allow you to be a better communicator. And I think, Masood, that's also one of the reasons that, thank you for the compliment, that I feel like I can communicate pretty well, because I can also communicate well inside of my relationships. And I'm willing to have difficult conversations. So be willing to have those conversations. The last thing that I'm going to leave you with is every single one of us is going to, at one time or another, feel like we're alone. And understand that the things that you're going through, 90% of the people that are in our profession have gone through or are going through that very same thing. Just because it may not be shown on the outside, I can guarantee you they've gone through it or are going through it also on the inside. So you're not alone. That's one of the best things that I can tell you. And when you know that, don't be afraid to talk to people about it. Lastly, find a great coach, find a great mentor who you jive with, who you believe in, and look at seeing if they'll support you and finding out where you're at on your journey. Once you do that, then take their advice and roll.
Dr. Buske, I'm going to take your advice and I'm going to roll. I truly want to say thank you so much for,
You're welcome.
Always being every time I message you on LinkedIn and I was like, hey, Doc, I need this, I need that. You're always willing to help. And like I said, I feel very inspired, and I'm so grateful for this conversation. I really truly want to say thank you so much.
You are
Thank
very
you,
welcome.
Dr. Buske. And
You
by the
got
way,
it.
sorry, I had a mispronunciation. At first, I said Dr. Buske, but I
All
didn't know
good,
it's
brother.
Dr.
We're
Buske.
good. No worries.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
your
brother.
time. Really appreciate it.
Good night, y'all.
Yes.
Good night.